Welcome to Abundance. You guessed it, a podcast dedicated to all things surrounding dance. I am Kristen.
And I am Hannah, and we are two best friends who are brought together by this art form.
Please join us in 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today we have a special guest with us, Marika Baxter. I reached out to Marika, who's been my physical therapist for some time growing up in Connecticut. She is very knowledgeable about working with dancers, and I really valued my time with her. I recall not only did I attend normal physical therapy sessions with Marika, but she actually attended one, if not more, of my private lessons with my ballet teacher to assist in my coaching from a different perspective. So when I reached out to Marika, she explained to me that she has had somewhat of a career shift. So we're excited to have her with us today and learn more about both paths and how one has led to the other. So welcome, Marika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So I have a question for you. How did you get started with physical therapy? Can you share a little bit about the rigor of the process as you became certified as a PT?
Sure. So I have a few paths that led me into physical therapy. I grew up as a gymnast and a dancer. And when I was a freshman in high school, I tore my ACL, MCL, and meniscus. So I was in physical therapy then for a long time and subsequently had a few more surgeries in high school and obviously had more physical therapy in high school. So that was from a very personal perspective, how I first experienced physical therapy for myself. But I also have an aunt who is a physical therapist, and her practice is in New York called Westside Dance Physical Therapy. And so there she was the first physical therapist to be brought onto a dance company. So their office gives physical therapy for New York City Ballet and School of American Ballet. And so I always knew about physical therapy because she was my aunt and lived next door. So it was like, you just knew about the profession. But I do remember when I was in physical therapy myself, actually, I really didn't like it. I didn't like being there. I mean, I was, 14, so I was not happy to be injured. But I also was just not really that enjoyable. And I remember thinking, like, this is supposed to be something that's helping me heal and get back to what I want to be doing. There must be some way to make this more engaging and applicable to what it is I want to get back to doing. So I think combined with the interest sparked with seeing my aunt and looking at what she did as really inspiring and really interesting, but also feeling like there's got to be a way to make this just a more interesting and all around healing experience, kind of sparked my interest to going into that as a field of study.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Was your aunt also a dancer? Is that how she got started with New York City Ballet?
So she was actually originally went to school for PE, but did folk dancing and gymnastics, and so she was involved in like arts in that way. Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then to answer the second part of your question, you asked me about the rigors of PT school, right? Yeah. So when I went to PT school, it was a master's program. Now, as you guys know, it's a doctorate level program. And so I went to Springfield College in Western Massachusetts. And at that time, you got in as a PT student right away as a freshman into the program. And it was a basically 5.5-year master's program. We were there for 5 years, but we did some summer and winter sessions as well. And so, yeah, it was the first few years were like your typical college experience. But once junior year hit for me anyway, it was a lot more work than most of my friends were doing. So, most days you went to the library after class and you were there until it closed at midnight, and you just did that most days during the week. I mean, PT school is amazing because you learn about all the different subspecialties within the profession, like what I did as a physical therapist in orthopedics and dance medicine is totally different than what someone would do in a cardiopulmonary unit or the NICU. So it's just in that sense, PT school was really interesting because you were just exposed to so many different fields, even though you're studying just to be a physical therapist.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And do you feel that being a dancer, growing up and a gymnast, that there were certain things that you already kind of knew that benefited you a little bit when you were studying? I don't know maybe how things were a few years back, but I feel like now more dance programs are trying to include some like anatomy and those kinds of elements as well to the training. So do you feel like you got any of that when you were younger that kind of assisted you, or not so much?
I think definitely you're aware of your body in a different way than someone who may not have been involved in such a performative sport.
Mhm.
And for sure, because had been in physical therapy myself, I remembered, at least from an orthopedic perspective, all the different exercises I did and the equipment that I used and the electrical stimulation and ultrasound and those things.
Right.
But also I did some volunteering at my aunt's office. And during college, I was an aide every summer and during winter break at a physical therapy office locally to where I grew up. So I definitely, all of that definitely helped me feel that it wasn't just everything new. There was obviously a lot new in PT school, but you had some of the language, even just as a gymnast and dancer, you have some of the language anatomically and movement wise that you might not have heard. So for sure, that was definitely made things a little more familiar going into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now, when you were working in your career as a physical therapist, you worked with a mixture of like normal athletes or individuals and dancers as well. Maybe not normal is not the right word, but non-dancers.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So even at Westside Dance, so I worked at Westside Dance Physical Therapy for 5 years before moving out to Ohio for a little while. And we saw, adolescent dancers, a lot of adolescent dancers, professional dancers, whether it was Broadway or in City Ballet or other dance companies. We saw former dancers. We also saw the parents of dancers and the dance educators. We saw some musicians. And then we just saw people who were involved in the arts, but had not participated in that way. So, right, like you said, non-dancers. So it was definitely a mixture of anyone who wanted to come to that facility. Yeah.
Great. And was that kind of something that you kind of advertised to clients, or was it one of those things where you just kind of started to build a network and people would refer other people to you and it just kind of like snowballed from there? Or did you ever try to like purposely seek out that population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in New York at Westside Dance, that's a very established facility. So it's already has the reputation of being known as a dance medicine clinic. And so that didn't need any advertising necessarily. But when we moved out to Ohio, my husband got a job at Ohio State. So I started working for Ohio State University sports medicine department. And there was a performing arts medicine program there when I got there. And so that our branch of the sports medicine PT department worked with Ballet Met and Ballet Met Academy, as well as OSU's Department of Dance. But we didn't really have, I believe until I got there, there weren't any physical therapists who specialized in dance medicine specifically. There was an amazing chiropractor, but believe the day that I started, another physical therapist who was a new grad who was interested in dance medicine and a athletic trainer who had dance medicine experience all started the same day. And so we kind of hit the ground running and did do a lot of that outreach. So we would go watch class at the local dance studios, at the Irish dance studios. We would watch class at Ballet Met Academy and really started to open up that program. And so by the time I left Ohio, we were doing, community foot and ankle classes and cross training classes and dance wellness lectures at local studios, even some screenings. So we did do a lot of work at Ballet Met Academy. Their summer intensive, we would screen every dancer who was in the program and give them like a semi-personalized exercise program based on what we did with the screenings. But then also there was a wonderful, Susan Brooker was the director of Ballet Met Academy when I was there, and she was very supportive of us, and we would teach dance wellness to the pre-pros, as well as even the academy students. So we did a lot of lecture and workshops. And so that was really, really, really fun actually at that time to develop the program and see where it went. So we went from not having that many dancers in the clinic to doing all this outreach to then having a mix of adolescents and these professional and pre-professional students and college students from the Department of Dance.
That's really cool. I feel like more programs need that kind of like screening and really like individualized attention and just outside perspective from just the dance teachers in the studios working with the students. That's really
neat. It was really neat at the Department of Dance at Ohio State. We taught I believe it was 1 credit, but I don't remember, class called Dance Wellness. And so we had a lot of students, we would take them through a screen. We had different guest lectures come in about nutrition and just, it was a super fun class because I think, like you said, it was a little bit of education and a little bit of self-care at the same time. And I think the hardest part is finding the time in the busy schedule of the dancer to fit these things in and finding the resources to be able to support the programs like that.
Yeah, I also just find it super beneficial when you have physical therapists that really understand dancers and dance in general, because then as a dancer, you can work on injuries or how to prevent injuries or strength and, all of those things. And so, yeah, I love what you're talking about, because as Kristen said, like if we could implement more of that in college dance programs or even just in schools across the country, I feel like that could be super helpful and would probably prevent injuries from happening if all dancers had more awareness of their bodies. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. And just a general question, I was wondering if you have any specific like recommendations for dancers as you notice, like as a population, that they could correct or be better about, if that makes sense.
That's a good question.
I want to just actually tag on to that real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but I guess it kind of goes hand in hand. I was curious about any like major through lines of common injuries or things that you see kind of crop up.
Yeah. Across the board.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is just resources. So the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science is an excellent organization. They do a yearly conference, typically, I believe, in October. And so that's a great wealth of knowledge and amazing practitioners of all different specialties, not just physical therapists, but physicians, nutritionists, psychologists, dance scientists, dance educators. So for anyone who's wondering about their body as a dancer and where to go for more information, I would say start with IADMS. There are different fact sheets that you can read about, and they have a journal called the Journal for Dance Medicine and Science. And I don't know if you put show notes, but I can send some resources if you would like about different blogs and different professionals that would be really great, because I am smiling because it's a tough question to answer because there are so many things to say. But what I mean, for sure, we see a lot of foot and ankle injuries because of the fact that you're using your feet all the time, and especially with ballet and point work. So the overarching thing I would say is just to build in recovery and rest, honestly, is really important, because I think there's so much pressure to, even though now we know about the importance of some of that, there is so much pressure to keep going, even if we're tired or even if we're injured. And so in terms of foot and ankle, the very simple act of just sitting with your legs elevated above your heart, especially if you're dancing for long hours and many days in a row, is really helpful for fluid flow and lymphatic drainage. And so, I remember, so we used to go in New York on tour with the ballet, like different physical therapists would go on the different tours. And I remember one of the first times, and we flew, I believe it was to Chicago, and we got off the plane and the dancers were talking about how they had sausage toes. And it was, the inflammation from being on the plane. And we just kept saying, like, just go to your hotel room and put your legs up. And even just that simple act, or even just in a long rehearsal day, if you can take your shoes off, even just taking your shoes off is important and helpful. Without getting into really specific details, because everyone is a unique individual and each person needs may be different from someone else. But I think putting your feet up and taking your shoes off during the day, if you can, is very helpful. And then, from like a biomechanical perspective, and because for me, most of, I would say the majority of dance styles I worked with was ballet, is just turnout mechanics. And if we could help, especially younger dancers, to not feel so much pressure to have as much turnout as possible at the cost of everything else. And then just teaching, how to maximize in a healthy and efficient way your turnout as you continue to dance is huge, because how we are moving biomechanically in a turned out position can affect your lumbar spine, your hips, your knees, your ankles, your feet. So that's a big one.
Great, thank you.
Is there anything else you're thinking of that I totally missed out on? Because those were a couple of questions. I think I don't know if I got to everything.
No, yeah, you definitely answered our questions. And yeah, any resources you do have, feel free to send them our way, and we'd be happy to kind of pass those along as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Marika.
Absolutely.
And right now is probably a good time for us to take a short break.
Here's a word from our sponsor.
All right, and we are back with Marika. I have another question for you. I read a little bit about your bio on your website about you, and you spoke about this a little bit earlier, but your approach to mindfulness and trying to find interconnectedness, like mind, body, and spirit, that seems very important to you. Can you talk a little bit about that? I feel like oftentimes we don't necessarily hear about how mentally we can work on ourselves as well as physically when we're going to physical therapy. So I'm just curious a little bit about that.
So for me, I always was interested in, or I can't even say was interested in, but could perceive not just what was happening physically with people, but what was happening in their emotional state. And I think you both might be able to relate to having an injury as a teenager and being a teenager, a hormonal teenager who's going through a lot of change and pressure and stress, as well as wanting to perform well and dance. And oh my gosh, what is this audition going to mean for me? And what is this performance going to mean for me? how all of the different parts of us affect all of the different parts of us. And so, as a physical therapist, we're not often taught or it's not necessarily encouraged to take that into account, because, we're a physical therapist, not a mental health expert, psychotherapist or else. But for me, it came to a point where, both in my own personal healing and journey, as well as when working with clients, that I just couldn't separate those things out anymore. And so I sort of took a deep dive into how our emotional state and our psyche affect how we express ourselves physically, what our subtle energy is and our energy body, and how that affects or intertwines really with our emotions and our physicality. And you asked before about being a gymnast and dancer, and did that help me in my pursuit of physical therapy and life? And what was interesting is, as I started to kind of dive into all these different less objective realms, I was so surprised that I had worked with the body for so long, but I was actually sort of in observance of my body versus actually inhabiting and really being with my body. And so, you, as a dancer and as a gymnast, we're so interested in and impacted by how we're observed by someone else. And I think we're really conscious of how am I going to be observed by someone else, the teacher, the judge, the audience. And for me anyway, but I also find this with a lot of clients, we lose our own inner experience because we're concerned about the outer judgment or analysis. So now I sort of blend the two, right? We still live in this world where and especially as a dancer, you're still going to be analyzed and judged based on what it looks like from the outside. But there's a difference between moving your physical leg, but being completely embodied in that leg as it moves. And I think you can see that too in how people's movement quality is. And so now, as I've studied all these different avenues between psychotherapy and spirituality and energy work, it's been really interesting for me to help people to embody all of themselves and to find healing and wholeness on all of those levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly interconnectedness between everything, dancing
Mm-hmm.
about artistry, but also physicality and being athletic.
Absolutely.
I did a lot of research our senior year of college at Mercyhurst about how dance and athletics correlate. And I came to the conclusion that it is much more than a sport. Like, although dance exudes those athletic qualities, there's also so much that goes into it that's beyond a sport because of the artistry that's involved. So just you talking about that makes a lot of sense. And it just reminded me of my thesis. So
yeah, cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I appreciate, I think, the perspective of kind of, like you said, losing your inner experience because you're so focused on like the external product and like how others are going to view you is just a very interesting way to put that all in. I don't know, it just has me thinking now.
Yeah.
Like I need to do some reflecting after.
Yeah. No, it's true. I feel like oftentimes we don't think about that, even though it is such a major part of dancing, like how we're viewed to the instructor, to the audience, or really anyone, and how that can affect us.
And for many dancers, at the end of the day, like we do what we do because it makes us happy and it's fulfilling for ourselves. And so if we're losing that part of like inner fulfillment and just focusing on the product that other people are witnessing, like it starts to get into this like kind of confusing area of now you're not really like doing what you like to do for the reason you like to do it, which is can be interesting.
Yeah. And I think there's what I've studied the most in is a practice called the realization process. And it's actually was developed by a woman named Judith Blackstone, who was a dancer in New York City and suffered injury, and sort of through her healing developed this meditation technique, series of practices that help to inhabit yourself. And so not only I think is it interesting to think of what we were just talking about, like where we're our motivation and how we're experiencing what we do and why we're doing it, but also just like a tangible experience of what it feels like to be and move in our bodies as a feeling versus an idea. So like we can do a dance phrase across the floor and have an idea of what that's supposed to be like. Or I can sit here and have an idea of myself, like I'm talking to you guys on a podcast, and I'm also a mother, and I live in Connecticut. And I can have these ideas of myself, but I can also just be with that dance movement or be with myself and just experience it with no particular labels or anything like that. So I think it's also this experiential shift in how we be is what I want to say, like how we are. So there's one little practice and it's super quick that I could have you guys try. So if you just take your hands, you can put them wherever they are. They can be on your lap, and you can just start to become aware of your hands. So maybe you're aware of what the surface that they're sitting on. What's the density of that surface? You can be aware of if your hands are warm or cold or what their temperature is. Maybe if there's any tension in your hands. And so that's being aware of your hands. And then I want you to inhabit your hands. So feel that you're within the internal space of your hands. There's no particular idea of this or meaning behind it, just that you're living within the internal space of your hands, all the way through each finger, from the palms of your hands to the back of your hands. And that you are this space within your hands, that there's no separation between you and the space within your hands. And so in the realization process, inhabiting the body is just one of the ways to know ourselves in this sort of subtle, different way. And so you can see how, like, for dance or gymnastics or movement in general, we can be aware of our bodies. Like we can be aware of how pointed is my toe, is my arm at the right angle, is my head tilted a particular way. But then we can inhabit our bodies and be with the movement from that depth. And it's a different experience. And I just remember, like I was saying before, being so surprised that I had been in these kinds of dance worlds for so long, but I had always experienced myself really as an idea or a concept versus really living within my being. And I think we can constrict in our bodies because of injury, because of an emotional thing, trauma. And when we don't live or embody or inhabit all of ourselves, it affects how we express ourselves. It affects the organization of fascia and our posture and how we move. And so that's kind of the cross section of the different ways that I approach working with people. So hopefully that little exercise or practice was interesting. And it's sometimes in the beginning like, well, I don't know what I feel. But once you finally let go of all of those things of what I should feel, you just kind of come into feeling. And yeah, it's a nice thing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Our listeners will have to try it out too.
Yeah.
Yes, if you're listening to this episode right now, please practice and do it with us or do it after us. Very good exercise. So thank you, Marika.
You're welcome.
So the work that you're doing now, is this your own established kind of business that you've created for yourself? Or are you working for another company? Where has this kind of taken you? Because I did a
Yeah.
little looking on your website as well.
Yeah. So right now, so 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, my husband got a new job and we moved. And so I had a practice um, up in a different part of Connecticut, in Guilford, and now we're down in Fairfield. And then a few months later, the pandemic hit. So um, my professional career is sort of in flux, but right now I see clients privately, mostly on Zoom, but have slowly started to see people more in person at a naturopath's office here in town. But I also teach some embodied movement and embodied meditation at the naturopath's office in person. And up until last month was teaching meditation a couple times a week on a online embodiment studio called Liberated Being, but it just closed, which is sad. It was a wonderful space. But so it's sort of a little bit of working for myself, and then also just doing different workshops and classes at other locations.
Great. I was going to ask how the pandemic kind of shifted your work, but I feel like you touched upon that just now. And
Yeah.
I'm sure your work in a lot of ways is needed more now than ever, as I feel like the pandemic has really kind of reshaped a lot of things in people's lives and how they experience things and what's going on for them, like mentally and emotionally, and which then, as you've mentioned, affects your physicality as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah, do you have, I guess, going forward, any particular goals? As you said, things have shifted a little bit. Now you're returning a little bit more in person. Is there anything in particular that, as hopefully the pandemic starts to kind of get a little bit better over time, any big goals or ambitions you have?
Um, well, I'm really, it has been very interesting to shift online. In the very beginning, the clients I was seeing in person, I do see some clients still for more movement based issues. And in the beginning, it was like, okay, well, I can't see you in person, so I guess we won't do this anymore. And then once we realized, like, okay, this isn't going to be going away anytime soon, let's try things on Zoom. And it works. So it's actually been quite good for me. I have 2 young daughters and a husband who works all the time and on the weekends. So to have that flexibility to still be in service to people, but have it also be in service to my family is kind of been great. So I think this idea of being able to offer things in both arenas, live and online, is great. And I would love to just bring this work, to as many people as possible, because I think it can be so healing on such a whole and deep level. And it's hard sometimes in our busy life and in our busy culture to feel like slowing down and quieting down and tuning in is not a waste of time because I'm not doing anything. But I think it's really this whole shift in the way we've lived in the last few years really invites in less of the doing and more of the being. And I think that's what the work invites to. So
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great too. Like you mentioned about doing a bit of both, doing some online work too. I think that when COVID hit, a lot of people think of, doing everything online as being kind of like, well, this is the only option. So this is what I have to do. But it can also be a like resource, whether or not we're in a pandemic, now that it's kind of our eyes have been opened up to this, and it doesn't have to just be like, oh, doing work online is a backup plan. I am teaching right now in addition to dancing, and I started teaching online during the pandemic, and now that I'm also teaching in person, I still teach a bunch of students online, and it's become less of like, okay, this was my backup plan, to now this actually works really well with my schedule. And I've developed some good like relationships with different students, and I want to continue it, not just I have to. And so I think that's great that you make them both work for you, and it suits your lifestyle and what you're doing right now with your family and everything well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that I think, there's a lot of silver linings that came out of the pandemic. Like, of course, no one wanted this to happen, but there's a lot that did happen that was a good thing. And these Zoom and virtual programs and things made it that much easier. And now there's people who can get involved that maybe can't be in person, if they're from a different state or a different country. And I don't know if you've experienced that online virtually as well, Marika, but like, have you had anyone from other places?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have worked with people across the country. And then, because you can record Zoom and load it to places, I have been able to work virtually, work in a recorded way with people from Germany, Singapore, France, all over. So yeah, it's been really great.
Yeah.
In person and is definitely maybe nourishing on different levels, but it's really neat to be able to have access to each other in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely pros and cons. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marika. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this and sharing so much of your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you both.
Yeah, we're very grateful for your time, as Kristen said. And everyone, you should check out Marika's website and get to know her more. Reach out to her.
Yeah, please do. I'm here. I'm actually teaching short 15-minute realization process practices on Zoom on Mondays and Fridays at 11. And for the month of December, I'm just offering them for free as a gift for the world. So yeah, if you want to tune in, you can just email me, marika@nb1wellness.com, and I will send you a Zoom link.
That sounds so wonderful. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into Abundance. We appreciate your support. We hope to have PK into your interest. Feel free to contact us at abundancepodcast5678@gmail.com and give us feedback on what you'd like to hear. That is abundance without parentheses. Go dance yourself silly. Bye for now.
A special thank you to Richard DiFiore for our lovely podcast tune and Matt Mellish for our cover art.